Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here and for having this conversation with us today. My name is Anika Behrndt, and on behalf of GreenUp, I'm very thrilled to have this conversation with Manuel Zeiche, who's the CEO of MPower, and with Renat Heuberger, who's also the chairman of the supervisory board.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
First of all, how has the Dallas experience been for you so far, and the Climate Hub especially?
In one word, actually great. I mean, for us, or for me personally, it's a great experience, primarily to network, but network with a variety of people, with potential partners in Africa. We're going to talk about our business in a second, with investors, backers, financial backers, blended financing partners, but even with, I'll just give an example. Yesterday, here at the hub, I met a guy who lives in Bern but is from Cameroon, and the discussion turned around that he's interested in a solar system for his family. So it was a business opportunity, and that's the variety of talks that we had here is actually quite interesting, quite tremendous.
Yeah, what I would add is really the inspiration. I mean, look what's going on at the rest of the WEF. Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging, if not depressing. And so what the Climate Hub is also, in addition to what Manuel said, is a place you come to basically get inspired, get new hope, see people who are still there, fighting on, and that's just good to know, gives you motivation to then go back and continue with your work on the topic.
That's great to hear, and hopefully we can have more inspirational conversations also in your panel discussion later this evening. Could you kindly give us an introduction to MPower and what the company does?
Yeah, absolutely. You know what, let me just take you a few steps back. How did we actually start that journey? How did we decide to go into the energy access space in Africa? My background is in finance and solar energy. I've worked for a big German bank, Deutsche Bank, for a while, moved into management consultancy, and then worked in the solar space for the last 13 years now. So to consider that the solar energy space is still relatively new, I consider myself almost a dinosaur in that energy space. I've primarily worked on utility-scale solar projects, large-scale solar projects. Done that in Europe, and then in 2014 we decided with my whole company to enter into West Africa to develop large-scale solar projects. And then we saw the need also from commercial industrial clients, the need for uninterrupted power supply, because they had power cuts on a regular basis. And that brought my thinking away from the big tickets, $15 million plus large-scale solar projects, to solutions directly to commercial industrial clients. And I'm convinced that we are at the moment at still the beginning of a decentralized energy revolution, or you can call it that we are still at the verge, if you take the global picture, of a decentralized energy solution, and it's just the beginning. So it took us, almost about half a year to 9 months. We really looked into the whole talk of decentralized energies and realized that there's such a tremendous opportunity out there, driven by the fact that there are 500 million people in Africa alone that are not connected to the electricity grid. But there are many more that suffer from daily power cuts on a regular basis, businesses, commercial industrial clients. And at the same time, what we've seen is a drastic drop of solar panel prices, as well as battery prices, in the range of 90% over the last decade. So you have that huge problem of access to electricity in Africa, and falling technology prices, increase of efficiency of solar panels. So that was a window of opportunity where we said, hey, we can tap into that opportunity and create a business model that is full for profit, scalable, and sustainable. And that is how we started to create MPower back in late 2017 to 2018.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction to the company. I'm wondering you yourself bring so much experience in the renewable energy sector already. What made you decide to go into Africa?
First of all, the experience that I had. My co-founders, one of them also had the experience working in Africa, primarily on the consultancy side for development agencies, development financing institutions, on the renewable and on the financing side. And that particularly drew my attention to the huge opportunities that are in Africa. Not necessarily renewable energy, but Africa is what I would say it's the last continent that will see a significant growth. It's like you would have said maybe the 80s going into Southeast Asia, the tiger countries, and right now, if you look at the demographics, average age around 19.5, digital natives, almost everyone has a cell phone. So you have that tremendous opportunity, and one of the key problems for the market to develop is energy. And at the same time, what I've mentioned before, you've seen these falling technology prices, and for us it was just a business opportunity. Foremost, a business opportunity that is scalable, but at the same time where we know we're having a key impact. Key impact in terms of climate, if you think about replacing diesel generators for commercial industrial clients, but also energy access to households that are not connected to the electricity grid.
If I may add one point, we had early discussions with Manuel when he started, and I remember clearly the one figure that basically knocked me over, and I said I have to be part of this, which was, you asked me, do you know how much an African off-grid household pays when they have to fire up their diesel genset? $5 per kilowatt hour. Now, do you know how much you pay in Zurich, Switzerland? I don't even know. It's not much. It's about 25 cents. So, I mean, wow, the margin between what you should be paying for electricity if the grid is properly working and what you pay when it's not is just dramatic. So it's the good old saying, it's expensive to be poor. And I just thought that this is the impact investment opportunity of a lifetime. What if we could bring down the power price for those households, give them more access to electricity, to all the goods that come with it, and on top, at the same time, save CO2 emissions from diesel gensets. I mean, what an opportunity. And it's really shocking. The figures really shock me.
Yeah, and just to expand on what Renat has said, I mean, this, to be very clear, the key driver of our end clients, it's not about green energy, it's not about clean energy, it's about saving money. If you think about a business that is running a diesel generator, it's about saving money. And of course, you have a good side effect, which is solar energy is clean.
This has been really insightful, and I think a lot of opportunities there, as you spoke about, that really enable a business also to grow and to operate on a for-profit basis. What would you say has been the largest challenge so far in scaling operations? Is there anything that you have kind of experienced on the ground which has been kind of unexpected in that sense?
Yeah, I think you have to look at the different life cycles of MPower as well, where any company, starting from the early days where everything was rosy, where you can take a decision and a shower basically, or in a coffee with the co-founders. Now we have a board where we need to convene and we have board decisions. So of course it depends on the life cycle of the business. But particularly, I mean, doing business in Africa is not easy. So, and I think that's also a competitive advantage that we have. I mean, we're now 75 people. We're operating in 5 countries. We have shown that it works. And I think that is a key also USP for us. I mean, we're solving a real problem with the hardware. So doing business in Africa is not easy. So talking about challenges, access to finance has not been easy. I would argue that for Pan-African business, well, it's never easy for a startup company, but for a Pan-African company, it's particularly not easy. We're now at the stage where raising debt is becoming more and more interesting for a number of lenders, but equity is still the challenge. A second challenge is, which is I think normal to any company, is like we're operating in 5 countries, so intercultural challenges. Making sure that you have the right people, that you have the right people that stay in the company. I would say this is, let's say, the second challenge. And the typical challenge of growing a company to the stage where we're in, introducing processes, standards of the company. And let me just add one, which is particularly into Africa, of course, is access to local currency financing, also political risk, but particular currency risk. The fact that you have currencies that are going up and down and they're not the most stable currencies.
Perhaps if I may add one more thing, which I find quite important. Manuel talked about the decline in solar PV prices. And of course, what happens when prices collapse is that you have a lot of people who just, in a way, come to Africa and dump their stuff on the ground and try to make a business with that. The result of that is that you have a lot of low quality installations and a lot of people who try out solar, put in some money, and then after 6 months it breaks. Now at MPower we have a very, very different philosophy, and our philosophy is that you install and you have just power coming out of the socket. Let that be our responsibility. So we're focusing on high quality, long-term panels that run for years. And that is a challenge because you have to convince people that it's worth paying perhaps a little bit premium, but then have long-term services. But and it took us a while, but I think now with 7 years of experience, we are now able to prove our point. And it just took a while, but I think now we're really there and can show that quality and good installation does make a difference. Last point, also very important, we don't want Africa to be full of broken panels sitting in landfills. So it's also recycling and the resource question, why we think quality matters.
And that's why from the early days we said what is important is that we have strong local teams. You can do business in Africa if you have good local teams. I mean, I've heard it in the old days when I was not at MPower, as like from clients, from partners saying, oh, you go to Africa and then 6 months later you come back. We said, no, we do it differently. I mean, if 95% of our team members are in the 5 countries where we operate in, that goes back to what Renat has said. We're local, we're there to stay, and we have technical teams that ensure maintenance and operations of the solar systems.
You've both mentioned some very interesting points, and I want to ask you a follow-up question on the financing aspect of it. You've mentioned that this is one of the key challenges of getting finance to kind of invest into the technology, but also to receive local currency financing. How much kind of finance do you need to purchase one solar installation on the side of the consumers, and who are these individuals that purchase these? Could you kind of walk us through a project of a customer, for example, and the way that this person receives the finance itself?
It's actually an interesting question. Let me run you through the journey of a system, of a product, how we do it at MPower. The way that we do it is that we have a sourcing manager in China, in Shenzhen. So keep in mind that we are a market enabler. So we are plugging into the ecosystem what works. So we're not a manufacturer of the systems itself, of the products. So the journey starts by the sourcing manager, our colleague in China, who's responsible for sourcing, strategic supplier relationship, and quality management, he buys a product. The moment that he buys the product, we have to pay a down payment of 30%. Then it takes roughly between 4 and 6 weeks for the product to be ready, to be shipped to our warehouse in China. At that point, we have to pay the remaining 70%. So think about from the financing perspective, at that point, we have to pre-finance the inventory. So think about a system that costs, for the sake of argument, $5,000. We then ship it to our markets where we operate in, for example, Zambia. That takes another, say, 2 to, let's say, plus minus 3 months, including importation, inland transportation, shipping, and this is a period, what we call inventory financing, what we have to finance. Then it's at our warehouse in Lusaka, and then the product is ready to be sold. We sell it directly to the end clients, if it's a big corporation or business, but we also work with local distributors as well as with local installers. At that point, the consumer financing starts. So we have clients that pay cash, but what we always try is we try to structure a possibility for the end client to pay for the system on a so-called lease-to-own basis, where he basically pays a small upfront fee and then he has to pay for the system in monthly installments. And that's what we call consumer financing. That's also the biggest risk. We do it by partially funding clients ourselves, but we also outsource, in parentheses, financing to third parties like banks or MFIs for them to finance the end clients. And that has been indeed a challenging part, like identifying these partners, making sure that they understand solar energy. But this is the journey of a product. Then, of course, once the product has been installed, it runs. We have our after-sales team, what we talked about earlier, and then once the system has been paid off, then the client owns the system.
Great, thank you so much. How has the cooperation with the banks or the local institutions been in the different regions? I imagine that there's also a lot of variation there.
Yeah, indeed, there's a lot of variation. There's always interest because they would like to get into solar energy, but it has not been their core product. So it's a lot of education from players like us to really get them to understand what solar energy is, the risk of solar energy, the life cycle of solar energy. Players like us, but also from, we talk about technical assistance facilities from development finance institutions. The reality on the ground is that getting access to local currency financing for solar energy is still a challenge. I have the feeling that things are changing, that banks are increasingly interested to provide consumer financing to clients, including for commercial industrial clients, but also for households. But we haven't seen a large-scale deployment yet. And this is one of the key challenges that I see in that space, in the energy access space, for local banks to really tap into the opportunity to provide local financing to end clients at affordable rates, at affordable costs.
Perhaps one point to add, because I think that's a point that is interesting way beyond solar power. I mean, one other side, if you think about it, is mind-boggling. Solar power is so known, you would think, and so simple to explain, so clear, and yet it's very difficult to get local finance. Now, think about anything else that you might want to sell in Africa, if not even solar power has an easy way to get access. So it's a long way to go, but the good news is, as Manuel said, there are some movements that are really encouraging, and one of the most interesting ones, I think, are the neobanks. Like new banks that come to the table with a completely digitized model, and the game changer there is to have much better data on your client's creditworthiness. Think about the old days. The reason why those banks don't want to give the loans is because they don't know what the risk is for that client not to pay back. But with much better data available, that gap appears to be closed, and that could be really a revolution for Africa, because customer finance in Africa is just unbelievably expensive. And if that happens, not only solar power like MPower could be in the upside, but many other green and clean products.
Absolutely. It sounds like you have like a twofold challenge. On one hand, designing the technology itself, but then also connecting and creating a financial kind of product to also balance it out. Before, you also mentioned that the core element of your strategy for the customer side is to really make sure that there are local ownership involved. How would you say that this ownership is beneficial to kind of the energy use itself, but also to the long-term quality and management of the solar panels?
Yeah, I think when we talk about local ownership, it has different facets, and it starts also by the fact that we have a local team. We have a strong local team. We don't it's not necessary to hire experts and then ship, and then for them to be on the ground. But it's really about local teams. The second, local ownership or local partnerships, what I mentioned earlier, is MPower is really a market enabler. We plug into existing ecosystems. So, we don't need to invent the wheel. We look at what works well. That goes upstream. If you look into the supply chain, there's no need for us to be a manufacturer of a product. We buy the different products. That goes also on the downstream side. One of the biggest nuts that we have to crack in the energy access space is last mile distribution. The way that we crack it is by partnering up with last mile distributors that have that distribution network, that have local sales agents, that have shops around the country. And this is by what I mean by we partnering up with local companies. The same way as we partner up with local installers for the larger systems. These installers are very often our subcontractors, but from time to time they also buy the products from us, saying, hey, I have a client. Well, we partner with them up, by that they generate a lead, and then we decide together who's actually the one that is contracting with the client. And last but not least, we also work with B2B clients. So we go directly to work with local corporate businesses.
Great, thank you so much. Is there any way of tracking kind of the energy use or the energy production? Solar is also, of course, challenging because it doesn't produce energy continuously. So there's probably still some sort of backup mechanism that will also need to be used, gas, oil, for heating Do you have any kind of measuring system in place?
Yeah. So for the bigger system, we always have a remote monitoring system in place, so we can measure and get real-life data from the system in terms of like usage. Is it operating at 100%? And what is the battery status, which also allows us to see if something is not 100% right. It goes the word of predictive maintenance. Then if, let's say, one of our technical personnel is in the region, we can go and ask him to check out the system. So that makes absolutely sense for the large system. So every system has remote monitoring or remote control. For the smaller system, of course, it's more and more expensive to integrate an IT tool or a remote monitoring tool. But what we still, I mean, we're very digitized. So we really would like to understand where is each system, who's the client of each system. So that's something that we digitize. All our systems have a battery system included, so for storage. 99% of our systems. We haven't seen one client who says, no, I only would like to have a solar system. And that is exactly what you said, is because they would also like to have electricity when the sun is not shining or when the sun sets in the evening. Which is also interesting because from a technical point of view, we also have to, from a technical point of view, it's a combination very often. It's a combination of solar plus battery, and in a lot of the cases also plugging in the diesel generator in case the sun is out, in case the storage is out of capacity. So that is the technical, let's say, the three game between solar, battery, and in the worst case, well, the least resort, which is the diesel generator.
And I just want to quickly double down that point, because I think it's a frequently heard misperception that solar power might be unstable because the sun is not shining all the time. That might have been a good argument 5 years ago, but battery prices, as Manuel said, have come down so far that really, literally all our systems have the battery backup. And the way we're doing that is, of course, that before doing anything at all, we are measuring and monitoring your daily curve, or the weekly curve actually. When do you need how much power? And then we feed that into our system to right size, because you don't want to buy an oversized battery. You don't want to buy an undersized battery. So the trick is to right size those systems so that they cover your pattern of your factory or your radio station or your hospital or whatever you need. And if that's the future. And again, there, with better data, the systems become better and better at predicting what load is going to be used when exactly. So the data revolution has been really beneficial, and the idea that solar power is unstable is just no longer valid. It's just no longer the case. And over time, if you think about what AI will do to our abilities to predict, it's really, I think there's an opportunity for Africa to completely leapfrog, and so from no grid or bad grid to independent systems that are just running.
Great, that's great to hear that you have the combination of these factors. In Europe, solar has partly also grown because there were subsidies, and also in other countries. How is the policy environment for that in Africa? Is there any kind of support from the regulatory or the policy side, or are there other mechanisms in place? So
of course it depends on by country.
Yeah.
Some countries they have more support, others have less support. Independent of this, the way that we see MPower is providing a solution that should also work independent of any subsidies, full stop. We wouldn't go into a market because there are subsidies. That's, I think, that is the guidelines for us. Because governments can change, policies can change. You don't want to be in a country or in a market just because there are subsidies. It has to make economic sense. Generally speaking, what we're currently seeing in the markets is that governments are absolutely in favor of providing electricity based on renewable energies. So this is the gap, this is the pathline. But on the other hand, they're in a dilemma. The dilemma is the fact that they own, most of the time, the local grid. They own the energy company. So on the one hand, they're pursuing renewable energy. On the other hand, they have to make sure that their energy company also runs profitable, and to a certain degree, solar energy is a competitor. And that is, I think, the one of the challenges that local company or the regulators have in the country. On the one hand, they need to extend the grid, stabilize the grid, On the other hand, there is solar energy that is emerging, especially from if you think about businesses or upper class households that are paying clients, that are becoming more independent of the grid and the energy companies. It's an interesting challenge that we're going to see.
You've mainly spoken about kind of the end clients using the energy for themselves. Is there anyone that already kind of tries to connect to the grid to kind of sell the electricity once it is generated? Or is it really just for the purpose of own consumption?
I mean, we're seeing that it's so-called net metering system, so where basically the oversupply that you have, you actually feed it back to the grid, and then you get a credit, where you basically get paid by the energy supplier. For now, the way that we do it is that the majority of our systems. That's why this measurement of understanding your needs and this right sizing. At the moment, the systems are sized in such a way that almost 100% of the energy can be used for themselves. So we don't really count on extra revenues from net metering. We have done that for the first systems now. I do see a lot of potential. But time will tell, and also we have to make sure that the regulatory environment is there, that it actually works, that you get the credit, that you get the regulatory. So we have been taking a rather conservative approach, and we see that as an add-on to feed back into the grid. But we've seen that in Europe, and we're slowly but surely also starting to see that and working in some of the countries where we operate in.
Great. You spoke about this kind of conflict with the regulatory, or at least with the governments. Is this something that you're actively kind of working on and collaborating with them?
Yes and no. I mean, no in the sense, and I'll be very pragmatic, is like, we focus on the business, we focus on building the company. What we always do is we always introduce ourselves to the different government agencies. We have a good relationship with the renewable energy. We support them. We join the associations. We give them guidance as much as we can. But so far, we have been working hand in hand. So of course we're helping them, but foremost we focus on building up a business.
Okay, great.
Perhaps one small point to add here, which could potentially become much bigger in the future, is that we have started doing first transactions, or at least started the transaction under the Paris Agreement, which is obviously the global agreement to cut emissions, and switching out the diesel gensets, decentralized power is a very interesting type of project that we could do. And if that happens, there's a totally different government relation that they need to have. Potentially, that could completely unlash the dogs in terms of the conversion. Because once you have the full government support and an international funding component in the system, that's one of the opportunities where we see massive amount of scaling potential.
Exciting. Hopefully this is going to work out. So you've really grown MPower tremendously over the last years. Kind of looking a little bit more ahead, what would you say are the next main stepping stones that you have for, let's say, 5 years? No, let's break it down. Let's make it easier for the next year.
Yeah.
5 is long.
No, there are a few stepping stones. First stepping stone, of course, is making sure that we grow the business in the 5 markets where we operate in, namely Zambia, Namibia, Togo, Cameroon, and Ghana. That is going to be the focus for the next few, let's say 2026. Second step is, of course, to moving into our 6th market. We do have what we call opportunities that we're following in at the moment in Malawi, as well as Burkina Faso. We're looking into Uganda as our next market. So that is, let's say, the second piece. The third piece is really fostering our position in the small commercial industrial space. And the last point, and that's project that I really like to talk about, is our energy hubs, as really scaling up that energy hub opportunity. So what is an energy hub? What we have done over the last 18 months is we have electrified about 30 rural health centers. So a health center that is not connected to the electricity grid. It usually it's a small health institution that has a nurse as well as a doctor. And what we do is we provide them with an energy hub, which is usually a 10 to 12 kW system, for them to have access to electricity. We provide them in addition with a fridge and a freezer to cool the medication. Now that there's a fridge and freezer, we see smallholder farmers to use the fridge and the freezer to rent out the space to cool their meat or the fish So we're generating revenue. In addition, now that they have a fridge and a freezer, the hub manager are starting to sell cold drinks. Don't ask the question whether we sell beer or not, but yes, we do. We have seen the need for a printer, so we are now also supplying a printer. In addition, there's a welder, a hairdresser, a movie theater being implemented. The community can use the electricity to charge the phone. Just because we have the anchor, which is the, let's say, the anchor client, which is the health center, a whole marketplace is being established, a market enabler that is run profitable. So if you're looking ahead, we've just secured funding for the scale up of that project, and that will be also a key focus or key pillar for us, an exciting pillar for us to grow that energy hub concept.
This, by the way, is also something that always amazes me whenever you're in Africa, this unbelievable entrepreneurial drive. You give an opportunity with a health center and some power, and businesses just come out, and I find it always very fascinating how much potential there is if only people have an opportunity.
Yeah, that's absolutely a big topic, but also solving for energy poverty. Because if you manage to give energy to the people, they can actually also just
do all kinds of things, everything. It's not that give them the opportunity and it's going to thrive. That's I think what happens, and that's why also we're proud that at MPower we're one stepping stone in unleashing this entire variety of different businesses that people can do.
This is a really inspiring mission, and this is incredible work that you're doing. Bringing the conversation kind of back to Davos, what kind of partnerships and connections are you hoping to make here in this space? And what kind of commitment would you like to see from the kind of broader environment for the coming year?
I will answer the question very, very short. I would like that the community here, the decision makers, including investors, see Africa as an opportunity, see the African growth as an opportunity to invest in, and rather see them as purely as risk. So of course, investing in a company means peeling off the risk, but above all, also seeing the opportunity. And I would say also to the community, don't miss the train of investing in African opportunities.
And to make that really concrete, we are in the market for an investment round that we're launching this year. And I think MPower is a very special case, and there are not that many tickets like that. If you're an investor who is interested in a solid case, a case that does deliver value in Africa, but not only for the people, but also like sound returns, that's MPower. And we would be really, really keen to talk to you.
Great, thank you. As a kind of final question to wrap up this conversation, what would you say is one kind of key takeaway from this, from MPower, but also maybe about the mentality of how people should be changing thinking about solar?
I think it's a bit to go on what I said before. It's a solid technology. It's going to grow. It's going to stay. And it's an opportunity rather than a risk. It's an amazing opportunity to have impact, but at the same time join the decentralized energy revolution, not only in Africa, but really in emerging markets.
And I think, perhaps to round this up, I often use the solar revolution as an example why there's absolutely no reason to give up hope on sustainability and climate action. What happened in the solar power ecosystem with the falling prices, the distribution, the learning, the opportunities, all we talked about, solving energy poverty, a problem that has been lingering for hundreds of years. I mean, and this just happened within a few years. It's with huge growth rates. That I think is an example all of us can continuously use when anybody is, has a depressive day or think it's not going to work. Think about the solar revolution, think about Africa, think about the decentralized opportunity, and you will have a smile on your face because it's something that works, something that scales, and something that is just like fun to be part of.
Thank you so much for this really inspiring conversation. Wishing you all the best for Davos, for the experience here, and hoping that you can find many new investors to collaborate with. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having us.